Good afternoon. It's so funny because I appreciate Amy saying Dr. Terry Griffin because I was going to say it. You know, when you go to school for all those years, I can hear my mother, bless her heart, saying, you better say doctor, you own it. So, Terry Griffin. I'm Terry Griffin, and I've been in the league since about 2013. My current position is Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. In my immediate past position, as of June of this year, I was the first African American woman to serve as the president of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. So I'm very proud of that and representing great women, urban, rural, suburban, and it was great. So that's who I am.
Okay, thank you. Martha.
My name is Martha Rock, and I have been a member of the League for 60 years. And I started in Boston when I was in my 20s, upper 20s. And it made a huge difference in my life all of these years. I am not president of anything anymore, but I'm the unit chair and I help with a variety of things from time to time. Thank you.
Okay, Eileen.
Hi, I'm Eileen Olmsted. I've been a president, I've been in the league for about 44 years. I first joined the league in California, and I was there for 29 years. And then I moved to Pittsburgh, and I knew that the first thing I had to do was find a league, because I knew if I did, I would meet like-minded men and women who were as passionate about voting and civic action and being involved in government as I was. I've been president of the league, my local league, 3 or 4 times, I can't remember. I have done voter service, which is probably my passion. I have done membership. I've even done the newsletter, and when my kids were in high school, they had to run it off on a mimeograph machine. I'll bet none of you even know what a mimeograph machine is. You crank out something, and out of the other end comes a copy. That's how we did back in the 70s and the 80s. So the only thing I haven't been is the treasurer, which this gentleman is for our league, because I don't know how to handle money. So it's my pleasure to be here.
Can you explain just real quick what voter service is?
Voter service is when we do candidate forums, when we ask the candidates to come together and talk about the issues. We always have to have at least 2 parties present to have one. We never would have one with just one party. For a long time, we've done them in person, but during COVID, we did them online through and streamed them on our Facebook page, which we found we got a lot more attention and we got a lot more people looking at our streamed voter forums than we did when we had them in person. We also register voters. And we educate voters, particularly high school and college students, about how important voting is. And Amy can tell you more about that because that's her area.
Okay, and I will if we have time. Preston.
Okay.
Hi there, my name is Preston Scheimer. I became a league spouse in 1969 when my wife joined the league in Montclair, New Jersey. Membership was not open to men at the time, but I was intellectually engaged in what was going on with the league. And so I became quite interested in what the league did. I became a member actually in 2013. At that time I was traveling on business, and I get a phone call from my wife, and she basically said, our treasurer has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. I volunteered you to be the treasurer, and you're starting now. Okay? So, under the circumstances, what could I say? You're getting on a plane, you can't argue, you know? So I became the treasurer in 2013. In 2022, this year, I was given a second hat, which is the first VP of administration. And you'll learn why later.
My early years, well, I know oh, that's right. I was married in
Hold it
the
very
mid,
close to your mouth.
can you hear this?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have a pretty loud voice, but I'll use it. Okay, I was married in the mid-50s, and I was 21. My husband was 24. This was a whole different era. And you went wherever your husband went in employment. So I was a nurse, a 3-year program in Boston. And so I had no degrees at that point. But what I did have after working as a visiting nurse for a number of years outside of Philly, which was a very interesting experience, I had babies. So I had 5 in 6 years. I'm just showing you it was a whole different, this is like your grandmother talking, because your mother probably, her life was probably different than mine. But so we lived in New Jersey, then Philadelphia, then Boston, and then finally moved to Western Pennsylvania. So I've been here quite a while. And eventually, I went back to school. I'll tell you about that later. But I was president of the Beaver League. I actually started it. And then we became a county league. And I was president of that for a while. And it certainly kept my kids busy. Stapling, as Eileen said, you did all this stuff at home. You didn't have a secretary or anything. What we did have was a babysitter. We didn't say child care, we just called them babysitter. So there was somebody that would come to my home and take care of everybody's kids so we could have our meetings. So that's the way that evolved.
Okay, great. Eileen? Yeah.
Well, I grew up in South America. I grew up bilingual, bicultural, and when I came to the United States to live finally at the age of 14, my freshman and high school classmates made fun of me because I spoke with an accent. I was educated in Catholic private schools all my life through college. I only had 60 people were in my graduating class. So you can see that it was a pretty closed environment and pretty protected environment, which all changed when I went out to Berkeley, California to get a graduate degree in librarianship in 1960. And boy, was that culture shock. Berkeley was a huge university. It was like a mini city. They had their own daily newspaper, and I'd walk around like, wide-eyed and just with my mouth open half the time. But it was a very exciting time to be there. And it was just at the beginning of the free speech movement, just at the very edges of it. And I lived at International House, where I met a lot of foreign students and had a lot of fun. I also, but as far as influences in my life, I realized much later in my life that the nuns had been very good role models to me because they were educated, they were administrators, they ran colleges and universities, they ran hospitals, they did lots of nonprofit institutions, and they were independent. They didn't need men, they didn't need a man to do things for them, they did all of the work. And so I realized later in my life, when I was reflecting back on that they had been excellent role models especially for seeking out in education, because I got 2.5 master's degrees over the years.
Don't do the influence yet, Preston, but go ahead and talk about your early years, your educational and work background.
Okay. Well, I was born in New Jersey. Any New Jerseyans here? Good. I thought you were born in South America.
No, I wasn't born
New
in
Jersey's
South-
bad, but I didn't know it was South America. No, actually, I'll be more specific, in Scotch Plains, New Jersey, if anybody knows where that is. I graduated from all the public school system in New Jersey, and then went to Cornell University and earned a degree in hotel administration. After that, I served in the U.S. Navy as a supply corps officer. And then after the Navy, I came to Pennsylvania and got an MBA at Penn State. And then I began my working career, which was at the Plaza Hotel in New York. Anybody know the Plaza?
Oh, wow, yeah.
Okay. And which was a fantastic experience. It was the only time in my life I've ever had cocktail conversation because of the people I was seeing in the hotel, and including Elizabeth.
Taylor?
Beautiful blue eyes. Elizabeth Taylor with the beautiful
Oh my God.
eyes that glow in the dark. Okay.
Goodness.
But
Tell Annette.
while I was at the Plaza, I developed an interest in, it turned out, in systems analysis, which was different than what I've been trained in at Cornell. And it led to a career change. And basically, I spent the rest of my working career in information and records management. Now, frankly, that's a career that if you ask your average first or second grader what they like to do when they grow up, they're likely not to say, "I'd like to be a records and information manager." But it is a fantastic career because it is one of the few jobs that allows you to be involved with everything that's going on, because you're responsible for information retention policy and disposition of records and everything. And hospitals, for example, at Pitt, the records program is extremely important. But so that's what I pursued throughout my lifelong career. And you'll notice when we get to a little later what we've done in the league, frankly, that's the only reason they keep me around.
He's good with the details. Okay, Terry.
Okay,
Early years, educational
my
and work
early
background.
years. A lot of what I'm going to share with you today has a lot of flavor. And starting with my early years, our family was very close, still is. And I would depict it as family, faith, and fun. My grandmother and her sisters graduated from college in their early 20s. And unfortunately, I was raised in Pittsburgh, but I lived in Wilkinsburg, and at that time, prior to that, they used to burn crosses on my football field. So if that gives you any idea of the climate and the attitudes, and when we moved into Wilkinsburg, for sale signs went up. And it was really, really unusual. We had one African American teacher, and he taught special education. Even though my family was rich in culture, intellect, creativity, enjoyed creative thinking, critical thinking at the table, the teachers that I was exposed to said, "You'll never go to college. Why don't you just, work at a restaurant or maybe be a secretary?" And the beautiful thing about those words did not define who I was because of the early years of my life experience in my family. But I will never forget the day, and Amy, I hope I don't speak too long, but this is all a part of what made me who I am today. Because we wanted more teachers that look like us, the students asked me to serve as their spokesperson and meet with the parents and the administration and talk to them about why it's important to have persons teach you who can celebrate your brain and encourage you along your journey. And so I was a senior at the time. I graduated when I was 17, but I was a senior at the time, and there was racial tension, 1968. And just a lot of anger. And the white students were dismissed before the black students. The media was there. And, when they dismissed the black students, somebody threw something and everybody just started to run. And I tripped and fell, and evidently some student brought a knife to school. My purse fell. Where the knife was, my belongings in my purse fell out. I was picked up by a police officer because, again, racial tension. They thought that there would be problems. I was brutally beaten. All this was caught on camera. I was arrested. I wasn't permitted to call my family. My friends called my family. Our lawyer lived 2 doors down, and my mom saw me on TV. It was like, oh my God. I was charged with resisting arrest, concealing a deadly weapon, oh my God, there are so many charges, and I was not permitted to leave the state that summer. Early years, formation. I should hate white people. The impact of my summer was taken away from me. But I turned those feelings of anger into action. Because I was brilliant, and I make no apologies for it as a young person, I had people who could vouch for my character, so my case was ultimately thrown out. So I ended up going to a beautiful liberal arts college in Antrim, New Hampshire. There are no black people there, I need you to know that. But we would spend summers in the New England states because of my mother and her siblings. And it was a very small school, and primarily wealthy kids went there. There was probably 3 black people, 2 were basketball players, and me. And I was a cheerleader. And something that changed my mind and about a lot of things, we would visit and have parties, especially when folks' parents were out of town. And I'll never forget, you probably don't know this name, Lerner. There used to be Lerner stores all over the country. And Marty was the student there, and his parents were away, and he had a party at his house, and Marty had a maid. And it just disgusted me, Amy, how Marty treated this maid. And I thought, do I need to be here? Because there are going to be things in life that you come across, and you've got to make a decision. Is this how you want to align yourself? Are these the kind of people you want in your life? So again, early years, great years, challenging things happened, and I actually dropped out of college and married my childhood sweetheart. Had a daughter by the time I was 20. Went back to school in my 20s. Found a program where I could earn a bachelor's and a master's degree at the same time. Got an additional social work, psychology. Got an additional master's. I have a doctorate, and it's in theology because my family are missionaries. So I taught in seminary ethics, systematic theology, how to develop programs. You know, you get the theory, but how do you actually develop programs where you can make a practical application? So those are my early years, my formative years, my education, and my work background. I was a professor, vice president of student affairs, and I also taught systematic theology.
Well, as I mentioned before, I was raised in the 50s. The economy was booming, post-World War II, but there was much going on under the surface. The parties were very similar. I remember people saying there's no difference between the Republican and the Democratic Party, except that the Dixiecrats still controlled the Democratic Party. In my home, I discovered that we were pretty liberal compared to my classmates' families and my teachers. We used to have a lot of political discussions at the dinner table. I remember vividly when I was in high school watching the McCarthy, the infamous, on our first television set, this would have been 1953, the Senator Joe McCarthy. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he was infamous at the time. He was leading the House Un-American Activities, attacked very good people and called them communists. And this was all on national television, like some of what you may have seen on national television recently. It was terrible. Some of our leaders in Congress today behave the way he did, but few dare to speak out against them. But in McCarthy's case, after 3 years or 4 years of him carrying on like this, the Senate censured him, and he was disgraced. When I moved to California in 1960, I became acquainted with Jerry Brown, the son of the then governor of California, because he also lived at International House. And he introduced me, and I became aware and concerned about the plight of the Mexican farm workers in the fields of California, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. And Jerry was very involved. He would go out every weekend and help the farm workers. My first active political experience, having been invited by Jerry, was being an usher at a huge rally for John F. Kennedy in San Francisco. And I was just 21, and of course I voted for him. He was absolutely electrifying. Those were very exciting times. COVID, how did COVID change our lives? Well, like probably all of you, we became sequestered in our home. And the first thing we started thinking about is, how is League going to continue? And all these old ladies, we all learned how to do Zoom. We all learned how to Zoom, and it was right before the midterm election, and we had all these activities planned. We had the
Candidate forum.
forums, thank you, candidate forums, and we turned them around and made them on Zoom, and they worked. And unfortunately, we were not able to register a lot of voters, but we did a lot of work with our Facebook and our social media accounts to reach out to voters and tell them. For instance, we were very high on voting by mail, which had just changed. The September before COVID, the state legislature had passed that anybody could get and I came from California, where people had been doing voting by mail for years before I came to Pennsylvania. I said, what? You don't have voting by mail? But we do now. And part of that was because of lobbying on the part of the League of Women Voters, because we actively supported the bill, the legislative bill.
Great. Preston.
Okay. Well, I'm probably the antithesis of Terry.
Okay, Preston.
We're talking, the question is, what were you doing when you were in college and so forth, and what events changed your life? So we're talking about the late 1950s and the early 60s for me. Cornell was alive with students at the time engaged in civil rights. It was a very, very active time. It was the time when drugs hit college campuses. We had the draft. Anybody remember the draft? No, I do. It all passed me by. I was in my white male Ivy League bubble. I was focused on getting a job, serving my military obligation, and pursuing the American dream. The white male American dream.
I still love you.
However, an author by the name of Ayn Rand, anybody read Ayn Rand? Okay. Produced a number of books, but the one that had the greatest influence on me was Atlas Shrugged. And I devoured it and became what they called an objectivist, which was a philosophy that she wrote about. And basically, it's based on the fact that you need to actually determine what is truth, what are facts, and use them for making decisions. A lot of what Ayn Rand stood for, by the way, was co-opted by the libertarians, and then they abandoned it because politically they decided that women didn't have the right to make a choice about their lives, and so the libertarians supported killing abortion. So I left that stuff behind me. The change, however, of this thinking and researching about facts and stuff really changed the way I approached life and started to live, because I had to challenge all those things that were in my bubble. And that has not stopped. And by the way, one of the things about the League is that they are extremely fact-based. Mm-hmm. They work really hard to find out what is the truth and to make decisions based on that. COVID was, because of my technology experience and so forth, became something that I was very involved with, particularly for the League. And as Eileen mentioned, it really changed the way that we had to do voter service activities and so forth. Because of my background, I was very much involved in learning how to use Zoom and teaching others. And just to carry that thought a little bit further, some of you may remember the primary election about, I guess the last time the judges were elected. We had 39 candidates running for Common Pleas judge. And here we are in COVID. How are we going to have a forum? So we did something that I think has been copied by others, but we actually ask each candidate to create a 3-minute video on their own and submit it to us. We gave them the parameters and so forth, and worked with Point Park College's students to put together for the website 39 different opportunities for candidates, the judge candidates, to talk about and answer 2 questions. It was amazingly successful. We had high volume on the website as people were trying to find out information about these candidates. Along the way, we also have, as all of you are using the cloud all the time, I know, we had our opportunity really to develop and accept 2 different solutions using the cloud. So we're using Google Workspace for our board meetings and all of our collaborative type work, and as a repository for shared documents. And we also went with a program for online cloud-based membership management, and that program also includes the website software, which both of those things came along at a very critical point because of COVID. We couldn't meet together in person, but we could collaborate online. And there's one interesting,
Real quick.
Okay.
I'm watching the clock here.
Okay, you're monitoring the clock. Okay, well, good. I want you to visit the League's website because it is a host of information. And then to finish it up, fortunately at this point, I haven't had COVID yet.
Real quick, Terry, a little bit about how COVID's affected you? Anything?
COVID provided me an opportunity to read more, relax more, reflect on the things that are important to me because I was seeing people die, relatives, friends die, and priorities became very, very, very clear. What is important to me? And actually to really raise the question, what would you give your life up for? And so those are the kinds of things that I reflected on. I'm very grateful that I did not get COVID. My husband did not get COVID, but we know a lot of people that didn't have the same fortune. So a lot of compassion.
Great, yeah.
You know, a lot of reflection.
Good. Martha?
What do you want me to answer about school?
You can work, because we're running short of, I'm sort of timing this. How about just how COVID has affected
Okay,
you?
well, I actually don't feel as if I was terribly affected because I get out a lot. We have Frick Park, Chenley Park. I recommend all this. I get out every day. There wasn't a day I didn't go out and do something. And I think people who stayed in the house all the time had troubles. So, and now with all the technology, it's not like, and I love to read, so that was no problem. I could call old friends that I hadn't talked to in ages, so I reconnected with a lot of people. So I feel a little selfish because I really don't feel as if I was terribly impacted.
Okay, there were, in thinking about this question, there were really 2 things that popped into my mind. One is the League it has a system of working on issues and so forth, and one of the ones that we addressed about 4 years ago was called gun safety in a civil society. And I was involved in that project. It was interesting because we used something called deliberative democracy, which is a process of bringing groups of citizens together and brainstorming for potential solutions. We did a lot of work all around Allegheny County on that, including getting on WQED TV. If you want more background, you can find it on our website under advocacy and policy positions. Unfortunately, we didn't really solve the gun problem. As you well know, it's not been solved. But at least there were hundreds of people in the region who became aware that the solution meant that we had to change the laws. And the other thing that in answer to the question has been our use of technology. And we've already really talked about that because we talked about the impact of COVID on making us use Zoom and so forth. But there was a question that you also asked about strategies.
Yeah.
And it won't come as a surprise to anybody in the room, but when new technology is introduced, it's amazing to see how the way we're currently doing it becomes very popular. And particularly when you're dealing with a group of folks similar to this here, the old ways were very, very comfortable. So I had to adopt a strategy, what I call gentle introduction, which is basically finding something that has to be done, that they really want to get done, and showing that the new technology can do it, and enabling them to make a case that you really don't want to go back to the old ways. So basically, we're using the Google Cloud shared drive approach, and we're posting all of our leagues have board meetings once a month. Okay, most groups do. It's always a problem of getting the reports in from all the various committees and getting them shared so that people read the things before the meeting and come prepared. So in the past, the league used to email them. So every board member would get 15 or 20 emails from everybody else with their reports attached. We now file them in a common file where they're on the shared drive, and people are encouraged to go and read them. Whether they do or not, I don't know. But at least there is a common repository with only one copy. So that's it.
And my goal is that we do a strategic plan,
That's
Preston,
right.
which we've been trying to do I've been trying. Terry, most important thing you accomplished and strategies you employed.
The last thing, you can't, at the state level, we actually implemented a strategic plan. You can't plan if you don't know where you're going. That's number one. Number two, an important thing that happened to me, I was appointed to started a league in Virginia, the Virginia Advisory Committee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights. That was major. Every state in the United States has a commission, advisory commission on civil rights, and the individual states get the opportunity to select what they're going to focus on. In Virginia, we selected hate crimes, and we happened to hold hearings in Washington on hate crimes, and the young lady who passed away, Heather Hare, Heyer, in Charlottesville, who died. Her mother was one of the speakers, and we had a lot of speakers do a lot of presentations that really gave us insight into what we need to do, see how people think, how can we make a difference. And to this day, that report on hate crimes was submitted to Congress and given to the President of these United States. And the last thing that I want to say is, in 2019, when I became a co-president, that is when Pennsylvania began to litigate a lot of the cases that we found ridiculous, unsatisfactory, just there's no word for it. The administration wanted to disenfranchise Pennsylvanians, and so the League of Women Voters got involved in litigation, won all of our cases, partnered with ACLU, Common Cause, and other organizations because we wanted to make sure that Pennsylvanians had the right to vote, realized they had the right to vote, they need to exercise the right to vote, and we still aren't there. So these are some of the wonderful things that we do at the League, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
Thanks, Terry. Martha.
My thoughts about strategies. I think one of the most important thing is working collaboratively, and you just gave a good example of that with other group and how it enlarges your effectiveness. For instance, I remember we worked with the Bar Association when I was in Beaver on a constitutional amendment, and really it worked very, very well. So I think that's one thing I would advise you with your groups to do is find other with similar interests and work together. It multiplies your effectiveness and gets the word out. The other thing that I learned that was very important was attending meetings. So I remember going to the school board meetings locally, and I went as an observer. I wasn't a member. Eventually, I did run, and I did get on the school board. And believe it or not, at that time, I was the first woman that had ever been on the school board there. And this was probably 40 years ago. Of course, that's changed a lot. So I think you can observe things and become a presence and learn a lot. Here, one time, at least once, I went to the UPMC board meeting when there was a lot of dissension with the Allegheny Network, Health Network, and people were not having good care because of it, and everybody was up in arms. And eventually this was changed. I'm not saying that we did that, but just by being there, a bunch of us would go to these meetings and make them a bit uncomfortable about what was happening. So that's something to do. Right now I work with Medicare for All because I think that's very important. But, well, that's enough. That's something that I think was some strategies.
Great.
I think advocacy is a double-edged sword, but I think it's important. I'm thinking most recently about Hillary Clinton's loss, for instance. So many of us were just so invested in her winning. The first woman, you know, it was just such a big, I get teary-eyed thinking about it. And, you know, literally people went to bed for a week. I mean, it was a terrible thing. So it shows you how important voting is, and not just on the regular elections or the president. Don't forget the primaries and your local elections. They're very important. Right now, people who run the elections, the secretaries of state and so forth, and nobody paid any attention to this. Now all of a sudden we have people running who want to change things and not for the better. So you really need to be involved all the time. Be a super voter. Every election vote.
Join the league.
Yes, we have little forms up here to join the league. I'll put the plug in.
I'd like to talk on that subject a little bit. I learned a lot in the league, and we were involved in issues that are as important today as when I was well, I joined the league when I was 40, so I wasn't young as my friend here was, but as young. But it taught me a lot about what was going on in the country. And for instance, we studied the military budget and arms sales way back in the 80s. We studied environmental issues long before the formation of so many environmental organizations. The league taught me about how important legally privacy was so that women could have a choice and decision over their health decisions. So I worked hard to continue this legacy, but I remember one small thing. In our city, this was on a very small scale, in our city they decided that they wanted to start recycling. I think it became a mandate in the state that the cities had to develop a recycling plan. And so the league got to work and we studied every kind of recycling plan there was. We looked at the pros and cons of everything because that's the way we study things. And we finally came up with a plan, and we decided that the best way to recycle was to divide the trash into different categories. And so we went to City Hall, and they had hearings, and we went to City Hall, and we got up and we spoke about how our trash should be collected. It was an important issue. Unfortunately, the city fathers did not choose our plan. They chose the one that I think partially they have in Pittsburgh, where everything goes in together, all recyclables, and then somebody has to go and sort them. But I felt very proud of the league because we knew more about trash recycling than the city council members were when we got up there. But
Thank you. Preston.
Well, I had a little trouble with the term liberation, so I had to think about that a little bit and decided that maybe for me, it's liberating when I can explain something about our local government and that other people don't know and their eyes light up with sort of fresh understanding. And so I'd like to share something along those lines to see if I can get those lights to light up in your eyes. if I were to ask you, I think since you're all now living in Pennsylvania, you probably have some awareness of the fact that our legislature is not terribly functional and that we have problems with our legislature. But if I were to ask you why that is, and I've done this a number of times in people, and I've asked, why is it our legislature isn't functional? Most people don't really know, and I didn't know. But I've found out recently, and it's because our legislature is built on rules which the people joining the legislature, the very first thing they do when they get in January, they're asked to sign the rules. And they sign them because they don't know any better. But the rules basically do is they say that there are 6 people in the House and Senate, just a total of 6 in our legislature that control everything. If any one of them doesn't want to do what the bills coming forward want to do, they don't go anywhere. And that's amazing. The 6 people control what goes on in Pennsylvania. They're all members of the majority party. So going back to the point about voting, the majority party controls everything in Pennsylvania. And as a result, nothing happens. If you want more information about that, we can point you to the website of the League of Women Voters and look for Fix Harrisburg. But the real thing is that the people you vote for at all the levels, it's really important to recognize that their party also has a role to play, because if they're in the majority, they basically control everything.
Thanks, Preston. Terry?
Does everybody have a pencil? Take out your pencil and a piece of paper.
Their phones.
Oh my God! How antiquated. That's so funny. See, Preston knows that I am not technologically savvy, so pencil and paper just makes sense to me. But however you do, I want you to write this down. When I think of joy and liberation, I get happy. I get happy. Why do I get happy? 3 C's. I want you to remember this. The first C, strategy, commitment. Being dedicated to a cause. Find something that you can be dedicated to and be committed. That's your first C. Your second C, collaborate. Be willing to work together. And when I say work together with different people, I grew up in America that says America is a melting pot. Well, if you put cheese, all different flavors of cheese in a pot and you turn up the fire and it melts, you know what cheddar is, you know what mozzarella, you can't, it's all melted together. Did anybody think about that? So we are not a melting pot. We are a salad. We've got hot tomatoes and cucumbers and zucchini and lettuce and all this stuff. So when you collaborate, get yourself a salad, honey. Make sure you're not collaborating with all the same people that look like you. And the third C, communicate. Be willing to respect and listen to others. Listen to someone's story. Can you imagine if we would just sit down and talk with each other? If you would learn from my experience, if I could learn from your experience. There's some guys that are working in my house and speak very little bit Espanol, but guess what? I said, muy gracias. And his eyes got big and I said, me llamo Teresa. Teresa, yes! A little bit goes a long way because we value personhood. Okay? So those are your strategies, and I'm excited. What are they? Commitment. Let me hear it.
Communicate.
Yeah. Oh my God. If you were in a Steelers game, you'd say, commitment! Yay! Collaborate! Yay! Only 72.
Communicate.
I'm having the best time of my life. So that's the strategy.
Well, like all of you, I am very concerned by the extremism that has taken over our political discourse. You are all aware of it. You see it every day. And many young people, we understand. We go around and try to register voters, and they tell us, we don't care. We don't, our votes don't make any difference. But that's not true. That is not true. So while politicians were not the greatest in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, at least the parties worked together. And there were some important legislative milestones, things like Social Security and Medicare and improved health for children. These were passed bilaterally by both parties. And when I was a young member of the League, we did not know what our other League members' parties were. We never discussed our political allegiances, and we didn't know. And there was plenty of Republicans and Democrats and probably some Libertarians and some Green Party people in our League, but we didn't know because we didn't talk about it. So it doesn't happen at this point in our times, but my wise words is don't give up. This democracy necessitates the active participation of citizens. I saw both when I was living in South America and in the Middle East, what despots can take over when they're not checked. Only the citizens can do that, and we need to be vigilant in order not to fall into chaos. It's not an option to be apathetic. Don't fall for disinformation and misinformation. Find out the facts. Find out where you can find out the facts. And the League of Women Voters is one place, I can assure you. Educate yourselves and line up to do the work of democracy. We have stood out as a country for almost 250 years as the great experiment in a new order. It's up to the next generation, that's you guys, to prevent that experiment from failing.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Eileen. Preston.
You took the
If
words
you
out
could
of my
follow
mouth.
that one, I don't know. Go
Well,
ahead.
I'll try, okay? Because I think we're all on the same theme, and that is the future of America. And actually, as us old people up here, it's really your future. And it's my grandkids' future. And it's the future for America, it's for the world. And the League is in a difficult position in a way because we're nonpartisan. We do not support candidates, as you've heard that. We don't support parties, but what we do support are issues. And we support the legislators and the candidates who are supporting our issues. And so that means that we recognize the importance of challenging candidates for what you really stand for and finding out what they are. That's finding out the truth. And then voting for those candidates who support our issues. However, this particular election coming up in November is one in which one could be, after the results, could become extremely optimistic or extremely pessimistic about the future, because it's that close. If one party takes control, then we will probably lose our chance to restore the earth, to advance what we have to do for climate. We will have taken away many of your rights as human beings to govern your bodies. And that's just the beginning of many, many rights that we will lose. Any rights that we have made in the process of different kinds of lifestyles besides white men marrying white women will be gone. And so that's very serious. The flip side is, if a different party takes control and maintains control or grows control, then we have legislation in place already that's going to significantly advance improvements in climate, get us away from our dependence on fossil fuels. You know the story, and that's why this election is so critical. So my closing word is, and my wise words to share, vote like your life depends on it, because it does.
Thanks, Preston. Terry. Can you hear me? Yes. We have just a few minutes, Terry.
Just a few
Terry,
minutes, yeah.
2 minutes and give Martha a chance.
Okay, I'm gonna give Martha a
gets the
chance, but
last
you know
word.
what? I intentionally decided to talk like this because you have to really listen. What am I concerned about? I'm concerned that you're going to be silent. I'm concerned that somebody's going to tell you history doesn't matter. So I want you to take your voice, and I want you, when people tell you history doesn't matter, speak your truth. And my words of wisdom to you are, in the words of Barack Obama, be the change that you want to see. Can you hear me? Thank you.
And that's from Gandhi.
And he borrowed it from Gandhi.
Thank you, Martha, for clarifying. Go ahead,
All
Martha.
right, I'm just going to say a couple of
You have 2 minutes.
democracy is not a spectator sport.
There you go.
Keep that in mind. And the other one I love is, you've probably heard, all that is needed for the forces of evil to conquer is that enough good men and women do nothing. And action is an antidote to stress. Why do you think Liz Cheney serves on the January 6th committee? She's had nothing but troubles, losing her position, everything else. But she is an individual who cares about democracy. Regardless of her party, she's doing what is right. So she is a good example for all of us, I think. I'm not going to say a whole lot, but I do think you should think about the small things, like working at the polls. They need lots of people to work at the polls. I was a judge of election for 10 years at CMU, and you're busy there from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and you don't get home till 10. Someone needs to do these things. So you're old enough to do it. You actually get paid to do it. It's not a lot. But so there's sometimes these small things. Helping a woman that you know who's running for office, who maybe needs money, needs people to go door to door, phone bank. You don't have to always go to a rally and the Women's March in Washington, and I did a Women's March in London. But it's important to help starting at the grassroots level. It's not easy to run for office, and in our country it's very expensive, even on the lower levels, to run. So you need to be involved in the nitty-gritty.